Schools Forum underway. As we do so, if I can just do a little introduction. We've got on the call Morag Malvern, who is the local authority rep joining School Forum. Good morning to you, Morag. I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to contribute as we go forward. We welcome back Sal, who looks no younger than he did a year ago and looks well. Morning, Sal. Welcome back to the team.
Thank you, Paul.
I did make a little note. The quality of the information has improved very significantly over the last year. Now, I'm sure that's not because you weren't here. I'm sure that's because your colleagues were anticipating you rejoining and wanted to get the game level up higher. Welcome to you.
Things have been in a very capable hands, Paul.
I'm sure they have. Also, Deborah Brio is on the call. Deborah is joining School Forum, representing the secondary academies group. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone.
I can see two names. Forgive me, Callum. Forgive me if I know who you are, but I haven't spoken to you before. Hello, Callum, and I've got Jenny as well. Who, forgive me, I'm sure I should know you, recognize you, but don't. So
that's absolutely fine. I am the practice lead for SEN. I work alongside Dan Robinson.
Lovely, thank you for that. And Callum?
Hi, Paul. I'm doing the streaming. I work with Madeline and Luciani.
Oh, great, thank you very much. And I saw we've got Ian Goff on the call as well. Ian, I think you're helping us on one of the items later on in the agenda.
I am. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Also, just for colleagues' information, Prue Bray is the new exec member for Children's Services. She's said she can't join this particular meeting, even though she's not technically a member. She would like to join us at meetings in the future. So we'll welcome her in absentia, and hopefully in one of the forthcoming meetings she'll join us as a guest of School Forum. So with the brief introductions out of the way, and say welcome to those of you who are new to the group, if we can move on to some of the more regular items. Madeline, have we got any apologies for absence?
Yes, Amanda Woodfin, Luke Henderson and Ginny Rhodes.
Lovely. Thank you, Amanda, Luke and Ginny. Thank you. If we could move from apologies onto the minutes of the last meeting. So the minutes of the last meeting are 16th of March 2022. I hope you've all had a chance to read through them. Can I first ask if anybody has spotted any factual corrections in your bedtime reading when you were going through these, rigorously reviewing them? No, I can't see any hands. So Madeline, if at the next opportunity I could sign those minutes as being factually correct.
No problem.
Thank you. Matters arising from the minutes, as has been the norm in the last several months. Lynn, you and your team have prepared a couple of the items. Can I hand over to you just to take us through the two items that you've got on your page 17, agenda item 37.1?
Sorry, 1 second. I'll just get the right page up and I'll share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, hopefully you can all see that okay. Is that?
Yeah, little bigger. Failing eyesight at my age is sadly too common. Lovely, thank you.
Is that better, Paul?
Certainly, I'm okay on that. Everybody else okay? Thank you.
Okay, so two items on that. So the first one was around national funding formula and Carol's original query around growth funds and falling roles, and the indication before about whether there was inequity regarding maintained schools and academies within there in terms of the NFF consultation. I'm aware that we've had that as matters arising for a number of time, and we've been rolling it forward as we've been reviewing it. The initial review that we've taken as a local authority doesn't suggest that there's any issues to be concerned of in terms of moving forward, but we are saying, just to ensure that that's closed down to everyone's satisfaction, we'll pick that up as part of the task and finish group starting over the summer for the schools block for 23-24 budget setting. There's also been a further consultation published on the national funding formula that runs from September. And it was the previous consultation, Carol, that I believe that the query had come out of initially. So we obviously will pick it up as part of that. There'll be work within the local authority done over the summer on that, on the questions in that consultation as well, to feedback by the deadline in September. So I suppose just now there's nothing to flag. We don't think there's a particular issue in there, but just to reassure that we will close that down specifically as we work through. There's a link in the papers to the consultation, on the new consultation on the NFF, if anyone else is interested in that detail. And then the other point was just on high needs blockchain. Again, something I know that I committed to some time ago, and just for a number of reasons around illness and capacity more broadly, we haven't been able to run it. So dates are about to be published this week. Effectively, we're going to run a series of weekly training sessions from around mid-August onwards. They will be virtual, so they'll be over Teams to try and make them as accessible as possible. We're going to limit them initially to sort of probably 6 people per session. I want to make them as useful as possible, and people feel that they've got the space to ask any questions and talk through it. And from experience, we found that a smaller group works better for that. We've had interest from not just Schools Forum, but a variety of other council colleagues and other individuals. So the sessions will be opened up more broadly. The information, like I say, will come out to everyone on how to be able to book a place for preferred dates through the Schools Finance Help Desk. And we're going to come on later on to a proposal of having a high needs task and finish group for budget setting for 23-24. So if we do go ahead with that, and anyone that's interested in that, we'll do our best to prioritise the sessions that suit them as early in the process as possible. I've decided to start them in August. I'm aware that is over the summer, but I expect that the first couple of sessions there'll be some teething things as we get into the flow. So we'll also say that anybody that wants to be part of those earlier sessions to join us, then great. But we will also reflect on dates and availability once we see what sort of interest there is, to try and, like I say, to make them as accessible as possible. I've also had a number of inquiries from wider council colleagues interested in just a more general introduction to schools finance session. There's increasing understanding of the complexity of schools finance, and more individuals who don't deal with it on a day-to-day basis that want to have just a sort of high level understanding of how it works. I know we did do a session for forum members some time ago. But like I say, what I'll do is if anyone in Forum is interested in attending any of those sessions, either as a bit of a refresher or as a newer member that might be interested in joining that, then let Catherine and I know, and we can look at how many sessions we might need to run for those as well, for anyone that's interested.
Thank you, Lynn. You can assure us, though, that there will be some sessions during term time, i.e. after the beginning of September.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll run them for as long as we need to, Paul. So there's no fixed end date. I just want to start to get them underway. There's some other colleagues within that are happy to do the initial sessions if we run them, just so that we can work out any teething issues, make sure that we pitch it at the right level of detail. But if anyone wants to come to a session and they're finding that there's no availability on dates that work, then absolutely we'll review the calendar and we'll respond to whatever demand there is as it progresses, Paul. And like I say, happy to then keep running them periodically for newer members or as refreshers, or for anyone that wasn't interested initially that might be at a later date.
Thank you. So if Carol, can I pop back to you? Yours was the original NFF request. I think we've touched on this a couple of times over the last 3 or 4 meetings. Are you comfortable now that with this assurance from Lynn, whether there is something there or not, it's going to be built into the review that we bring for the 23-24 budget?
Yeah, I have looked at the new consultation document, and it does actually refer to my concern. So I obviously wasn't the only person that raised it. It's a very interesting document, and I was wondering if we would get any guidance from Wokingham on the implications of some of the questions, because I'm not sure I fully understood, particularly the high needs block funding bit.
Certainly something we can look at, Carol. I mean, we need more time to digest it all ourselves and work through it. Yeah, so but that's certainly something happy to do, and we can, it's not due to be submitted until early September. So, for anyone who is interested in working with us as we progress over the summer, then happy to do that.
Carol, is it something that you think would be of value is it something that you think would be of value to this wider group to have some feedback from Lynn and the team at a full meeting, or do you think it's something that goes into the task and finish group preparing the budget for next year?
Possibly, and it possibly affects the high needs block group as well, because there's quite a lot of stuff on high needs block and transferring monies from maintained schools to the council, not academies to the council, which I really didn't understand. I'm going to have to read it again. So
yeah, there's
it
a
may
there's a
be the-
lot in there, Carol, I think for us all to read and digest, definitely.
Could I suggest a couple of things? Madeline, could you add a URL to the consultation document to the minutes that go out of this meeting, please? Lynn, could you please look at the document and consider whether your team bring something to the October meeting to share with us what's going on? And Carol, if during your further review of it you feel there's something that really does need to be brought to our attention, do you think I could ask you please to let us know so that we can put an agenda item for October?
Yeah, October's probably too late because the consultation closes on the 9th of September. But it is probably something that schools ought to be looking at, because it's going to impact our funding moving forwards. But if we don't fully understand the implications of the consultation, I'm not really sure we can respond to it. It's not the best timing, really, for a change.
Okay, do you have a suggestion how we might approach it?
I don't.
Okay.
I think last time the Institute of School Business Leaders put out a briefing to schools on the implications of various questions to the schools as opposed to the local authorities. So I was going to contact them and ask if they're planning on doing the same thing again. And if so, that can be circulated more widely, I think.
Do you think there might be an opportunity before the end of term to bring an interested group of this school forum together more informally to look through to see if we can contribute to that consultation? Recognizing the short time span we've got before the submission has to be made.
I'm happy to get involved because I've got not an awful lot to do between now and the end of term. But I think it's quite important.
Can I ask you, are there other colleagues who similarly would possibly be prepared to give up an hour or two, or let's say an hour or an hour and a half on a Teams call to look through this issue?
I'd be happy to. It's Julia here.
Thank you, Julia. Then can I, Carol, Julia, Madeline, if we could take this offline, Lynn, if we can just take this offline after the meeting, let's get together. Let's see if we can pull a small group of people together who've got an interest. I can see further hands going up, but my screen's not showing me whose hands they were. Forgive me.
I think we need somebody from the LA, because I think the implications of some of the questions are LA based rather than school based.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm
Catherine,
more than happy to explore that, Paul, but I think there is still a challenge of the time that we need to fully digest the consultation to make so that we can feed back to you appropriately. And I think that is definitely a challenge before the end of term, but we'll certainly look to see what we can do.
Could we do something very early in September? That might be better.
Yeah, happy to try and accommodate that if that works for everyone else.
Darren, I saw your hand up as well. Was that a sort of, yep, you would be prepared to support that little group?
Yeah, happy to, yeah.
Thank you. Madeline, then can we move it forward? Could we look for a date in the first week of term back? I appreciate that's a very, very complicated period for many of us, but let's see if we can put aside an hour in that first week of term. Madeline, can I leave it to you to schedule a date for us, please? Lynn, yes. Catherine, from your team, please, if you could do whatever review is necessary. If we've got the URL in the minutes, that gives us an opportunity to look at things as well ahead of that meeting. Thank you all. Any comments on the training matter arising that Lynn had? Thank you, Lynn. Obviously, as soon as you can get those dates out, I'd be more than happy to join one of the early ones if you want to. A friendly critic. Just
Thank you, Paul. I maybe I'll take you off on that, so thank you.
Okay, not a problem. I've got a couple of other matters arising, and I'll then just check around for others. The external Foundry funding was a matter arising that we had. Lynn, I think it was one of the meetings where, or the meeting that you were unable to attend. So on the high needs block, we were looking at how does the out of borough, what assumptions have been made in those figures? Would you be able to cover that in the high needs block update later on?
So we have referred a little bit to Foundry budget setting later on, further on in the agenda. I think probably just to quickly cover it off here, there's not a huge amount of current income comes from out of borough into Foundry. The predominance of Foundry funding comes from the Wokingham high needs block. We have a sort of Q1 finance review meeting with Foundry on Friday, where we're going to be looking at, it's part of the continued joint working with Foundry to understand how this year's looking against the assumptions we made at the time of budget setting, because we recognise that there was that ongoing longer term piece around their financial budget setting. So we can certainly look at that with them to provide a bit more context to that on Friday to bring out a later date if anybody feels that the points covered elsewhere in the agenda haven't sufficiently covered.
They were two distinct points. One is the out of borough assumptions. So what assumptions did you have in your 23-24 budget for out of borough, and in particular increases in costs? Because as we know, that's one of the areas that we have relatively little control. In fact, no, we have no control over, or very little control over. And depending what assumptions you made, i.e., let's say costs will increase by 5%, it may be that they get blown out of the water if we find they go further than that.
Okay, so I think on that, I can pick that up later on in terms of the revenue monitoring report and the detail that's in Appendix C in that, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, fine. There were two other items that I had. One is one that it is bugging me. We've had Education Welfare Services and an explanation of how the team functions, what the costs of it are, what the structure is. I think we've had that on the agenda for 3 meetings. And for all sorts of reasons kept pushing it forward. Amanda, I think, was the one who originally raised it. She's not here at this particular meeting. Could I have a commitment, please, that by the October meeting we will have, Sal, thank you, we will have some presentation, please?
Absolutely, Paul. My apologies, I wasn't aware that it was on the agenda for this meeting. However, obviously, following the last school forum meeting, we've had the white paper, which makes some very significant changes to what's likely to be impacted in terms of our education welfare service. So actually bringing it back in October is really, really timely, because we'll have had time to consider what those changes also mean in respect of school attendance service or education welfare service going forward.
Thank you. So Madeline, please could I ask you to make sure that that's a specific item on the agenda for October. And Brian, if I can just pop back to you, please, falling roles. Do you want to give us a quick update on falling roles?
Excuse me. Yeah, sorry. We did look at that at the last or the final task and finish group to do admissions, and Catherine, come on, I don't know if Catherine's online. She might be able to join in as well. We looked at the different formula and looked at whether any schools would actually meet their criteria that is there, and none of the schools would meet the criteria that is currently in place from the DFE. Is that right, Catherine?
That's right. Yeah, it's quite strict criteria.
Very strict, yeah.
Yeah.
Some might meet it on 1 year alone, but a lot of it's over showing a pattern over 3 years, and that was part of the issue there.
Yeah, they're expecting you. To get the funding, they're expecting that your numbers would increase back to normal again after 3 years.
Yeah.
Maximum. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to be the only one banging a drum on this, but the demographic shift in Wokingham is having a fairly detrimental effect on particularly primary schools as the younger population moves outside of the centre into the newer conurbations that are being built around the outside of Wokingham, and as we build new schools outside of Wokingham rather than in Wokingham. So whilst I understand, and I think I know you've been trying to find a methodology within the ESFA guidelines of coping with falling roles. I think it's beholden upon us, but then I'll listen to the rest of the group to find a way of doing it. Leave aside the ESFA say, no, there's no mechanism that we give you to easily do it. I don't think that's an excuse for us not to try and find a way of doing it. Now, so I don't want to be the only one banging a drum. Happy to let it ride if other colleagues want to let it ride, but I don't think the problem is going to go away. It's going to get worse as people move out of centre, out to the outside edge.
I think in time, schools will qualify for it, but currently, because it's only really been 1 year, it's not, they're not in that within that criteria. So it's something that I think that we need to keep on our agenda and on our radar, because I think it's going to affect our schools. The schools are going to hit that criteria within time, I'd say.
I hear that, Brian, but I think one of the criteria is a very low Ofsted rating. What a horrible place to be. You've arrived at that particular point, and only then do you get help. Whereas we're at a position at the moment where I think if we think more innovatively, we may be able to avoid some of those schools arriving at that point where they've got into a place where they now are granted help. But again, I don't want to. So can I ask colleagues, is this something that we want to put on the agenda as an item and prepare a paper and look for innovation, or do we let it ride until it becomes a problem at a later stage?
Paul, if I may, I think the ongoing, it's a verbal input later on in the agenda, but the development of the admissions working group and what we're seeking to do through that admissions working group will certainly be keeping this fresh on the agenda. I don't think that anybody's suggesting that just because we don't currently meet, or schools don't currently meet the funding criteria or the thresholds for intervention, that we're just putting our hands up and going, job done, we'll come back to it when we do. I think we are going to be keeping a very close eye on falling roles. We are going to be considering, well, what options are available to us within the system that we are able to, and what levels we are able to move. So I just don't want colleagues to feel that it's not on the agenda for us to continue watching, and it will be key within that particular subgroup that Brian chairs also.
And do you genuinely, I mean this in a nicest way, but do you genuinely feel that you have the breadth of innovation in that new group to be exploring some things that may be outside the current quite well-defined guidelines? My worry is, whilst I appreciate you may not be holding your hands up and going, well, actually, we can't do anything, I think it's going to need some pretty creative thinking to find a way round what are the current guidelines. And I'm asking you, therefore, when we form that group a little bit later on, I think you need to be reassuring us we've got some of that creative thinking in there to help us round it.
I mean, not wanting to steal any of Brian's thunder as the chair, but I think the fact that we've got that group, it's a subsidiary of the new Borough Education Partnership, which brings a broader range of schools and leaders, system leaders together. I think through that mechanism, we ought to be able to have the creativity of thought to put into this part of the agenda. I'm not at this point going to guarantee that we're going to come up with all of the solutions, but certainly we will collectively, as a system, be exploring what options are available to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, at the last meeting in Task Finish, when this reg was created, we said that we wanted to keep this as an agenda item and looking at something, like you said, creatively looking at other options about what we can do with it moving forward. So it hasn't just been parked, it's been taken forward to that part of that group.
Okay. Can I turn to colleagues for any other comments, or if not, we'll move on from matters arising to the next item on the agenda. Liz?
When we have the October census, that'll know our pupil numbers that will affect our budget for April next year. So that would be a really good chance for schools finance to look at the impact on schools' budgets.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments, then thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Lynn, for your update as well. If we can move from matters arising on to item 38, declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest relevant to the particular items that we have on the agenda at the moment or for today? I can't see any hands going up, so Madeline, if you could note that. Actually, Madeline, can I also ask, are declarations of interest something that we should or could renew annually? I don't recall having signed a bit of paper for quite a while.
You don't have to review the declarations of interest. It's just forum members have to declare, obviously, if they have an interest in a particular item. So the onus is on the individual members.
And the items on the agenda on that particular meeting.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for that guidance. If there are no declarations of interest, can we move to item 39, which is energy pricing? Looking down my little crib list. Thank you, Lynn, for providing me the crib list. Ian, I gather you're hi, welcome, Ian. You're going to help us with energy pricing. Well,
yeah, so it's just a brief update on what we're experiencing with regards to the energy frameworks and contracts that we have in place. So cut a long story short, it won't surprise anybody. I think everybody's in a worse situation with regards to energy now than they were a year ago. The council contract is a little better, but no better in that regard. Essentially, we have seen some massive price shifts on the energy contract. So we've just tied into a 2022-2023 financial year period energy contract that is an energy increase on electricity of 57% and on gas 199%. Now I know that people are going to go, oh my God, and everybody wants to shoot the messenger in this regard. Please bear in mind that's from a very low starting position. It's a commercialised contract, and very importantly, it's against an energy marketplace that went up in the last 3 months of financial year 21-22 by 875%. So we're in a decent position in terms of energy, but it begins to show what the market is doing. I was watching the market just alone yesterday. And the market alone yesterday went up by another 11% on one day. So we're in unprecedented time period for energy. It's a situation that's going to persist. It's going to pester us. From my perspective, we wear quite a few different hats within the energy team, and it's painting a picture for being more and more energy efficient and looking to renewable energy generation on a very increasing basis. But yeah, so it's essentially that's the price scenario. We've written out to all schools via a newsletter. We'll do more and more communique, some of which I'm in some schools meetings tomorrow. So it's just a matter of putting that out there, unfortunately, and this is the backdrop to energy. And as dreadful as it sounds, I'm already forecasting for 23-24, and by April 24, we actually anticipate it doubling in price again. There we go.
Thank you, Ian. Catherine, Lynn, can I ask for the maintained schools, were you able to share some guidelines as to how the maintained schools should build their budget for 22-23 based upon some feel? And is the information that Ian has just given us, is that going to enable you to share that type of guidance for the forthcoming 23-24 budget?
Yeah, we did inform schools in the last meeting that we had. We briefed them saying that I can't remember the percentages now, but this is increased from then, those figures. So we did ask schools to build that into their budgets, the increased amounts, but it's gone up again since then. I think we said 80%, didn't we, for gas at the time?
We did,
yeah.
Yeah, we were looking at, I mean, again, it's just a market. We were looking at 80%, and then 105 went out on the official documentation, but 199 is a big difference between 105. So, yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of that's reality. In terms of the school's planning, if we advised everybody to do X and they have done X, and suddenly the outcome is Y, that there's no finger pointing or it was X, it moved to Y through no fault of the team or the colleagues involved. So the finger pointing doesn't become at the individual for inappropriately putting the figures together, and therefore we as an organisation and School Forum and the deficits and the balances that we've got need to be supporting those schools that may have had those particular challenges.
Absolutely, Paul, and we've been working, my team's been working with Ian to make sure that we get as comms out to schools in as many ways as possible, and that was part of the reason for us inviting Ian along today, so that we can continue to keep it, use every opportunity to ensure that everyone understands the challenges that we know schools will be facing as a result of this.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions to Ian? Ian, thank you. I can't see any hands up at the moment. I think everybody's got their heads in their hands rather than raising their hands. But thank you very much for the update. And if we could ask you if you could feed back through Lynn and Catherine as you learn more, that would be very helpful, because they'll then feed it back into the group. Oh, actually, Ian, I can, sorry, not you, Ian Goff, but Ian, I can see your hand up. John, have you got a question?
Yeah, hi, Ian. I'm obviously representing early years providers, so essentially non-maintained nurseries. Are we able to maybe come under the umbrella of Wokinham's contracts if that's financially better for us?
Yeah, it's something I'm being asked all the time. I mean, essentially, our contract, despite the fact, I've just highlighted some, huge increases, they are still well and truly below actually the market average. We're still the CCS framework ordinarily operates about 20 to 25% cheaper than available market rates. So if you're on available market rates, it is within your interests to come into a contract like offering like we do. At the moment, I'll be honest, there's an awkward arrangement with a lot of, sounds dreadful from my perspective, but subsidiary organisations, we've got a few. So I'd more than happily have the conversation with you. What we're trying to get to a situation is where that's more formalised moving forward and is a commercialised offering. But yeah, look, if you want to get in contact with me as an aside to this, we'll see what we can do.
Superb, I will do. Thanks.
Thank you for that offer, Ian.
Cheers.
If there are no further questions, thank you very much for attending, Ian.
Thank you.
If we could move from item 39 on to item 40, appointments to SWAG. And I think I'm passing back. It's Sal. Thank you. I've got you on my list. One thing you can help me with, though, is how do you come up with an acronym of SWAG when the initials don't work that way on the paper?
I was going to say, I think that's a typo within the agenda, within the papers. As much as I like to think I've got swag, it's not the correct acronym for the group. The group's actually the School Admissions Working Group. However, acronyms and names aside, as Brian said, it's a group that he chairs. It's a group that's been looking at school admissions arrangements for the local authority and the borough. One of the things we're looking to do is to, under the Borough Education Partnership, is kind of expand some of the focus of that group to take into account broader issues as they relate to sufficiency of pupil places and school capacity. And so we're going to be hopefully taking some amendments to the terms of reference forward shortly, just to expand the view of which this group has the influence, have some influence in. To help us shape things going forward into the future. One of the things that we'd like to do is, as well as have the current representation, which is made up of schools and the LA, we'd also like to request that there are specific places made available from Schools Forum membership because of the financial links between sufficiency. And so I think we'd like to put forward that there's 2 places available for School Forum members to attend what is currently the School Admissions Working Group. Brian, yes. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, there is actually. Sorry. The idea, because from the BET meeting, which is the Borough Education Partnership, was proposed that the membership from the School Forum on that Task and Finish group go over to this new group to keep that continuity going. So we've got Sarah at Addington, Ben at Bowhunt, Amanda with Bournemouth, Shirley at Forest. If they're still willing to be part of that group, we'd like them to stay. There was myself with primary. Hester at Early St Peters is also on the FAT panel representing primary with me. She's quite happy to come onto that admissions group, which makes sense. But then we're after another primary rep to go onto it, because if all those 4 secondary reps are keen to stay on it, that means Amanda's there for the special schools, and we've got 3 secondary heads. We'd need another primary head to make up 3 primaries as well. And Karina's got a hand up, so I'm hoping Karina is going to say yes.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Karina. I was hoping that. I know we had a quick conversation about it at one stage. I have got something I can quickly share if you like, Paul, just to give the objectives that we come up.
Yeah, please, I'd be very grateful. I can. Yep. Please, yes, thank you.
I'll just see if I can find it. I've got so many documents going at the moment. Here we go. Yes, I hope everyone can see that. So the basic objectives is there. I'll get this sent through to Lucina so she can put it as part of the minutes, but it gives an idea of the priorities that that we're looking at. And the Falling School Falling Roles funding is on that. And we're looking at the demanding, the new housing, all those sorts of areas that is making an impact on the different roles within the school. So that's where we currently got to looking through this. I've been working with this with Zoe and Melissa over the last couple of months.
Okay. Thank you, Brian.
And then you've got the basic membership there.
Okay. So if we could include a copy of that report with the minutes, please, Madeline, if you could pick that up, and Brian, just pull back together again. So you would like us to do 2 things. One, agree that, for want of a better word, the admissions task and finish group is dissolved, because I believe that's notionally a formal task and finish group of school forum. And secondly, that the colleagues that you listed who were currently on task and finish group move to the new, not swag but swag, and that Karina has also volunteered to join that same group as a primary rep.
Yes.
Could you also then please, in your little note to Madeline, could you also share the names? I picked up, I think I heard several of them, but forgive me if I repeated them, I'd get them wrong. So if you could include the names of the colleagues that are currently on the task and finish group who are going to move to the new group, if you could include them on your little list of Madeline, and Madeline, if you could include those in the minutes, please.
Yep, no problem. Can we just, could Sarah, Ben, and Amanda and Shirley are online, could they confirm that they would still like to be part of it? That would make it easier to we can say that we can move forward on that part.
I haven't seen Ben's name on the list today.
Yes, that's fine, Brian. I do think, though, if we're going to look at admissions to special schools, that we do need a representative from SEND there, because we haven't looked at admissions into special schools at all on that panel yet.
Yeah,
there's obviously that is a real need.
Yeah, the service lead for SEND is part of the of that group.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Jenny's popped up on my screen, so I mean Jenny's put her hand up.
Yeah, it'll be me until there's a permanent head of SEND, I'm sure.
Thank you, Jenny.
Amanda's not on the call today, Brian.
No, surely. I'll email them and just get that all confirmed and send it through. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay. Any further questions to Brian or Sal on the switch from the task and finish group to? So is it SOWAG or is it not going to have an acronym? It's going to be called the admissions group or whatever.
Admissions group, yeah.
Admissions group. That sounds good. Lovely. Thank you. If we could move on to item 41, looking at my crib list, this looks like Lynn, this issue. Please, revenue outturn for last year.
It is. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks. I'm conscious that I used up a lot of time earlier on matters arising. So if I could ask you to focus on the issues where there's a shift rather than, forgive me, going through the whole report. Let's assume that most colleagues have read the report where there's been no movement from the forecast.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as I said, the report is for noting, so it gives the provisional final outturn for the 21-22 financial year. We're obviously not expecting any changes to this, but it is still subject to external audit. So in terms of summary of report, so forum members will be aware that at the time of budget setting, we were expecting a deficit on the DSG of 2.6 million, being driven by the Heinies block for last financial year. The final outturn presented today shows a net overspend of 4.2 million, which is 2.6% of total DSG income. Cumulative deficit that's taken to at the end of the year is just over 10 million in terms of sitting across the predominantly driven by the Heinies block sitting within the DSG. The report itself obviously sets out key movements within that. You will see from today's format of the report that we've tried to keep a consistent report across this and the revenue monitoring report, and that information within the main body, and then 3 key appendices that you will see. So one is on the block detail associated with it, so a bit more detail in each of the blocks and what that looks like. Secondly is the growth fund, so detailing what growth fund looked like, which for the outturn purposes there was no change on that from what we looked at in the forecast in the March meeting. And then it's some further information on Heinies block, given the financial challenge that's in there, but also to try and respond to some of the queries that have been coming up through previous discussions. Again, as requested, so not to rattle through all this detail, but everyone will see individually. So within the schools block, key movements on forecast was around academy recruitment. So that was sort of 94,000 less than we'd anticipated by the time the DfE had done all their adjustments to work that through, and it just related to timings of rate adjustments that they do. So no impact on any individual schools. It's purely at the timing on that sort of between local authority and DfE recruitment process. Dedelegation, so supply cover. That's what the key dedelegated item that we still have. There was an £84,000 underspend on that at year end. Those that were involved in the task and finish group, when we looked at the review of dedelegated services, we understanding who's going to be on maternity leave, who's where cover is going to be needed for sick leave, etc. during the year has been difficult. However, we have learned a lot through that process, and that's something that we're looking at how we can improve mid-year reporting to get a sense of where that is. Forum will also remember that we amended the funding formula slightly in terms of how we set dedelegated budgets for that item for this financial year. So we wouldn't expect that same level of underspend necessarily, but again, that's something we'll be keeping under close review. And if we did commit to doing that annual review of dedelegated as part of budget setting, so if we feel that there's anything key coming out of that, we'll obviously look to reconvene that group to work that through as part of the budget, the wider task and finish groups under budget setting. Growth fund, as I said, was where we expected to be. It's technically an overspend in year, but it wasn't. It was a plan for. We knew that was going to be the case because we had funds within reserves. Darren.
Thanks, Lynn. It was just on the growth fund. I think we came in under where we'd anticipated we were going to be because those additional places for primary, I think it was, weren't actioned.
And secondary. You're right, Darren. We came in something like £200,000 under what we thought it might be.
Yeah.
But the overspend relative to the in-year planned figure was 69, and that comes out of reserves, which I think is what Lynn's trying to show here.
Yeah, that's grand.
Yeah. And we've got a similar issue for next year as well, where we've got a slight overspend in the year, but it'll potentially come out of reserves.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, both.
Just on the delegation, please, Lynn. I said I didn't want to spend much time on this, but how much have you got for maternity and sickness in this year's budget in total, compared to the fact that we were 84k lower last year?
That's a very good question, Paul, and I do know that, but I couldn't tell you that figure off the top of my head. Catherine, if you've got it to hand, we'll mention that, but we can certainly share. What we'll do is in October, we'll be at the midpoint of the year, Paul, so we'll bring something back more specifically about what actual costs are today against the budget and the assumptions that we made, just to see how that's looking. So we can certainly share that as part of revenue monitoring at the October meeting.
We put 281,000 in for 23-24.
281.
281,000, yeah.
Thank you.
So we did bring down, we re-looked at how we, at the funding model, so that we brought that down the funding formula number on roll came down from how we'd set the 21-22 budget. So I would expect it to be better aligned, subject to the fact that there is not necessarily ever a fixed pattern on the number of maternity leaves and sick leaves across schools. So
understand. Thank you. Do you want to move on to the high needs block, please?
Yeah, so in terms of high needs block, again, sort of setting out, again, I'm going to come on, there's some more detail in the appendix that I want to try and have some time just to touch on briefly. But again, the sort of key themes in terms of where things have moved across the individual setting headings are set out in terms of the report. If I can jump on quickly to the appendix, which hopefully you can all see. So again, assuming that everyone's had a chance to read this, so we've set out a little bit more detail just to reconfirm what the approach to budget setting was for the 21-22 financial year. You will remember that came off the back of the Special Schools Forum we had in December 2020, when we looked at we had a sort of high needs block dedicated session, and we looked at a lot of activity and reporting on there. All of that fed into the approach that we took to budget setting for the 21-22 financial year. Just as a reminder, we'd sort of assumed a level of increase in activity across the course of last financial year, but in reality, what happened was actually significantly higher than that in terms of the number of funded EHCPs. And I've included, Forum will know that last financial year we tried to introduce, well, we did introduce some activity tables as part of revenue monitoring activity to sort of supplement the information that you were getting throughout the year. We've reflected on that a little bit of how we don't want to get to the stage that we're just throwing loads of data at you without actually giving you any sort of the key messages that we feel as a local authority we should be flagging as part of that. So this appendix, it's a similar format for both the outturn report and the revenue monitoring report is looking to, rather than giving you all that sort of underlying data, sort of pull out what the key themes are. And I think this graph is particularly stark if you look at it in terms of what we expected to happen or what we thought the most likely position might be at the time of budget setting for 21-22 in terms of the number of funded EHCPs we expected to see in the budget, and then the reality of what's happening. So these are the number of funded top-ups. So obviously there are a higher number than that of total EHCPs, but in terms of the number of funded top-ups which come from the high needs block, and the changes in that are the key drivers that change the forecast. You know, places are fixed. We know what that looks like on the whole, short of any exceptional circumstances. It's funded top-ups that really drive that change. And what the orange line looks at is the sort of linear presentation of budget setting, what we expected the change in the number of funded top-ups to do over the course of the year. The blue bars are showing what that actually looked like at the start of the year and at the end of each quarter as you move through the year. And what you can see is that swing from the end of quarter 3 to end of quarter 4 is huge compared to previously. It's a massive swing over the course of one quarter of how those number of EHCPs increased. And reflecting back on discussion and what was shown in terms of discussions at March Forum, and we know at that point in time we'd identified that real increase in forecasting. That was a lot of that washing through and us then understanding better what the impact of that is. We're going to come on and talk about it in revenue monitoring report. But you know that has a knock-on impact into budget setting for 22-23, because obviously by the time some of that became available, we were already, you know, it's almost too late to feed into that initial budget setting process for the current year when you think about timelines that's involved in pulling all this information together. So you know that in itself, and again, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit later in the revenue monitoring report about the levels of activity that are continuing to come through that, and that the SENS team are still seeing that are coming through there. So for 21-22,
I just checked they are their fiscal quarters rather than calendar quarters.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So that yes, the financial year. So that's sort of at the start of the year, at end of March, and then this is sort of end of June, sort of through, or the best alignment of data that we've got for those periods of how the forecast and the information we had kind of flowed through. So let's say we'd expected a 14% increase in total funded EHCPs when we set the budget for 21-22. We actually saw an increase of nearly 30%. So we'd made what we thought were realistic, most likely assumptions and budget planning at that time, and it was completely blown out the water. There's further information in there that sort of gives you an idea, again, trying to answer some of the points that were raised through March Forum to give you an idea of what that looks like, increases over individual settings, the proportion of out of borough to in borough, again, sort of what it looked like at the start of last financial year, what assumption the budget was set, and then how that looked at the end of the year. So you will see that obviously, as we've looked at, the overall number has gone up. When we set the budget at the start of the year, or the experience at the start of the year rather, was that 23% in total of funded EHCP top-ups were out of borough. We set the budget basically on that sort of trend, but actually the reality saw that by the end of the year, 28% of funded EHCP top-ups were out of borough. So a significant proportion and a slight increase in terms of where we thought we would be. Just to add there that excludes, I've excluded further education colleges out of this because we don't have any in borough, so they are by nature all out of borough, and I wanted to give that picture of what that looks like for those where we've got some control over what that percentage looks like. Again, some further information in there about geographical trends by setting types, which I'm sure that you can all read through. So if that talks about activity, what I've then tried to say is a little bit about how the cost profile has changed or didn't change over the course of the year, on us reflecting about our budget setting approach to where we ended up. And again, so forum members will be aware that the whole of last financial year, again, in those activity tables that we were providing, we reported activity numbers, so pupils, but also to give a flavour of how that broke down across different, so for example, different tiers within the banding system for Addington, within the resource bases, and then also even for independent non-maintained, a sort of profile of sort of categories of how that rose. When the principles we set budgets on are informed with what we see around that. So for independent non-maintained, for example, we don't just take a blanket average of, say, 65, 70,000. That would be a mean average of what you could look at, but we look to do something a little more sophisticated on that, as what does the actual profile look like? And we build assumptions based on that. When we look and reflect on last financial year and look at how we track the range of unit costs across the year, there were obviously some movements, that there always are, and but it's more about the complexity of need of individual children rather than actually the cost profile, if that makes sense. So we'll see when we come on to the revenue monitoring report that there's been an increase in the forecast for Addington, for example, against what we had at budget setting, because a number of existing pupils at the point of review have moved between bandings, and that's shifted it. But if we look at the actual core of, if needs stayed the same, for example, and the unit cost assumptions that we'd made in building the budget, then actually how we ended the year was in line with what we assumed in the budget. There was no real swing in that underneath it, which is really interesting for us, that it really is about complexity of need and overall activity that's therefore really driving the pressure. I know at the last meeting there was a specific question in terms of inflation and how that's handled around independent non-maintained. So again, I've said very briefly, I've kind of set out there the process that we do, but effectively there is a process. So any independent non-maintained special school that wants an inflationary increase considered to an existing placement has to apply into the local authority. That's handled through commissioning, but in conjunction with finance and SEN. It's a quite separate process from where if there's a change in need. So if there's a change in needs that an independent non-maintained special school wants to consider further funding, that has to be through the full SEN process and the panel process and everything associated with that. This is purely about cost inflation. There's documentation, there's a process that they have to submit through by. It includes a breakdown of costs and rationale. That is reviewed in detail. There's a cap applied generally in that. So Wokingham is part of the South West SEND framework, and they take the approach that they take to looking at inflationary uplifts for anything through that. Again, there is a sort of formula that they work through to set out what that cap might be, and it's been sort of 2.5% in some cases in recent years. That doesn't mean to say that is what any provider that asks would get, absolutely not, but it means that we would not consider anything above that at all. And in reality, actually, the requests for the 21-22 financial year that were approved and worked through were actually very small, and in total, the contractual inflation uplift agreed as part of that formal process was only around 20,000 for 21-22. That says academic year. The impact was on financial year. Some schools write to us and look for uplifts from April, some do it to look for it from September, so it's a bit of a mix. But that 20,000, sorry, that's a typo in the report, should say financial year. So a relatively, really quite small percentage when you look at the total spend that's in that area.
So importantly, what have you done for, and you may want to talk about it in the revenue monitoring piece, but what assumption did you take for inflation on independent and non-maintained for 22-23?
So I've tried to keep the revenue monitoring report in exactly the same format. So I suppose that's maybe we cover any questions, Paul, and then we move on to that, because yeah, it's set out in the same detail in that report.
Thank you. Good night. Yeah.
Probably just quickly, I suppose, sorry, just before I'll make you dizzy before I jump up again. Just one other thing before we move on that I wanted to highlight was just in terms of balances and reserves. So we did last year in the outturn report, we started to try and give a little bit more of flavour about what overall reserves looked like, but it was a very sort of broad introduction. It's not something that we've routinely been reporting through Schools Forum. So I've looked to set out some further detail this year, just again as part of our commitment to try and improve transparency and understanding of what that looks like. So Forum may or may not be aware that there were regulations brought in and a statutory instrument on the way local authorities had to account for DSG deficits. That's currently in place until the end of this financial year, and it effectively means that DSG deficits are ring-fenced in an unusable reserve, as the official term is, and therefore is not considered as when auditors or others are looking at the financial viability of a local authority. They are not allowed to take that into account. It's ring-fenced and set separately. As a result of that, there are some ways in which we have to report that and reflect that in the local authority accounts. So anybody that's ever interested and wants to go and look at the local authority accounts or wants to have a chat about it, more than happy to do that separately. But effectively, that ring-fenced unusable reserve is known as the Dedicated Schools Grant Adjustment Account. And what I've looked to do in there is just a bit of supplementary information on the notional amounts and the movements in year that basically reconcile to that adjustment account as it appears in the draft annual accounts of the council. We have, through this, sought to track, so hold separately, for example, the 55,000 that we knew that was the de-delegated contingency from previous years, the growth fund amount that we've been holding again in reserves that's been part of those discussions. We will continue to hold that notional breakdown of what sits within that adjustment account, but I just wanted to flag that, and we're going to come on again to touch on the safety valve programme a little later on the agenda. So as a reminder, that's the DFE programme around high needs block deficits that Wokingham is due to participate in from September this year. At some of those early discussions in preparation from that, the ESFA have been clear that safety valve programme won't just look at high needs block, it will look across the DSG in its entirety. And, and they have reflected the fact that they expect local authorities to look at what's in that overarching reserve, to look at it in whole, and look at how that's used across the piece and not have a very fixed elements that are ring-fenced within that for specific areas. So it doesn't change the approach to anything we're doing just now, but it is something we're going to have to reflect on when we think about future approaches to growth fund, etc. But we'll pick that up through various task and finish groups as we move through the summer and as we understand those requirements better.
Lovely, thank you, Lynn. And once again, thank you for the quality of the information. Also, thank you for following up on the forum request to bring out the specific items where there are large variances and share with us how they've been or how they've arrived or what the background is. Can I open this particular item to colleagues to ask Lynn or Catherine questions around the outturn figures? I can't see any hands going up. So Lynn, thank you very much for helping us with that. Item 42 on the agenda is revenue monitoring, and I think you're up again, are you, Lynn? Yes, you are.
So you have me again. I think sort of recognising that Catherine did a sterling job without any support at the last meeting when I was off with COVID. I'm seeking to do my bit to balance that off a little bit today as a thank you to Catherine. So you have a bit more of me today. So revenue monitoring report, again, just as I've mentioned, we're looking to do that in the consistent format. So same sort of level of detail and same breakdown in the body of the report that everyone will have seen. And again, setting out the three appendices, again, on some more detail in the individual blocks, the growth fund, and then some more high needs block analysis so that we've got that sort of consistent read across. So again, it's a report for Schools Forum to note. In terms of summary, so at the time of budget setting, we were expecting a deficit of around 4.1 million across the DSG. That takes in account of where we expected to be on the high needs block, and also the fact that we would have a sort of in-year deficit on an in-year overspend on the growth fund, if you like, all be planned for because we knew we were holding money in reserves. The current forecast has moved by 400,000 and now projects a deficit of 4.5 million, and there's some further detail in the report of where the key movements are. I'm going to come on and I'll touch on some of those in a minute, but the key trend that we want to flag, and it won't come as a surprise to many of you around the room, is that real increase in activity around early years in particular, and those moving into Key Stage 1. The number of EHCPs and the change that we've seen in that has been quite stark over recent months, and that's really one of the key drivers that's driving the ongoing risk within figures. Based on that, the cumulative forecast for the DSG is now projected to be 14.5 million at the end of this financial year, but actually in reality there are significant key risks over and above that. Again, I'm going to take you through some more detail, but there are key risks of around 1.7 million over and above the figures that are in that forecast just now when we look at ongoing activity that's coming through the SEND service and what that looks like. Just to take you down again, like I say, same format as the outturn report, which hopefully helps forum members sort of read across. In terms of looking at high needs block and movements in there, so there's been sort of increases in expenditure forecast and then some refinement of income forecast as well, which is partly offset the increase. In terms of those key movements on the information that we had at the time of budget setting. So within special schools, there's been an increase in the assumption forecast for Addington, and that's a result of a number of existing pupils moving up through banding levels at the point of review. So those now being factored in. There obviously was some really good and worthwhile discussion on the Addington budget at March forum. We've had an initial meeting with Addington, and I'll say it's on the call today, and there's that ongoing commitment that we have to working more closely with Addington to ensure that we've got we're bringing forward as much as we can budget setting, budget planning discussions, improving comms around that area, and really doing that joint working on the longer term plan. Some really interesting things came out of those initial discussions that we had, and some of that around that, particularly around the pressure on the Addington budget as a result of gaps across the wider system, and in particularly health provision. And that's something that we've agreed jointly that we need to be able to call that out and look at that more more broadly. It's no doubt in the short term it's still a pressure for Addington. We need to look at that and work with them to support them and the sustainability of their budget. But it's also that wider question on that wider system partnership work within Safety Valve and within the rest of the SEND improvement programme about how we use some of that finance intelligence better to feed into that, about understanding the real financial impact on schools across the piece, about where there are gaps elsewhere that effectively schools are having to pick up, and that has a direct impact on budgets. So that's something we'll be continuing discussion with, and that I'm sure we'll bring back at a later date. Other movement is around post-16 further education colleges. Again, there's an increasing number in there, and there's a forecast increase there against what we'd set at the time of budget setting. I think there are some risks and some opportunities in that. There are a number of older individuals where, again, at the point we were writing this report, we're still working through with the SEND team about what their movements are going to be for the September, for the new academic year and moving in. So we've taken a fairly prudent approach. I think some of those will be moving on and that costs may reduce, so there may be some opportunity in that to come down on there. But for now, we've existing pupils, we've kept them in the forecast at current costs. If we look at key risks to the forecast, as I said, so this is over and above that figure that we've reported in the current forecast. We have a number of still unplaced pupils for September. I know there's a lot of work going on and you know, significant amount of work to resolve that situation. And I'm sure in terms of the high needs block update later on, Sal or Dan can provide a bit more information on that. Where some of those pupils that are unplaced for September have current funded top-ups. So they are in the forecast, if you like, based on their current setting and their current funded arrangements. To ensure that we have as sensible a forecast as possible, where there is an individual where we don't yet know exactly what's going to happen in September, we have kept them in the forecast at their current cost assumptions and assumed that cost assumption will continue until the end of the financial year. There is obviously some risk around that, but there may also be some opportunity. So, you know, for some of those young people, there may be some increase in cost, but actually some may reduce. So there may be some offsetting factors. And again, we'll keep an eye on that and bring any key movements on that back to forum in October. But there are a number of young children, as I said, that recurring theme that's coming through about the number of really young children that are coming through that actually we don't have a current cost base for in the high needs block. And there are a small number of those that are still unplaced, and there's also some ongoing discussions with Addington about capital investment and work that's being done there in terms of ensuring that we can support as many children there as we can. Over and above that, there's a huge amount of additional activity still coming through and still being seen by the SEND service. So again, potentially an additional 30 EHCPs per month based on current assessment activity that's coming through. If we profiled those across the year at a range of average costs, so, you know, again, it's a bit of an average assumption, but just to give you a flavour of that. So if we assumed that across each of the months to the end of the financial year, there were 30 additional EHCPs or funded top-ups came online, and assumed a range of funded top-ups or placements at sort of 50% of them being at, you know, 7,500, 45% of them 20, and sort of 5% at the higher level. If you work all that through, then the impact just on this financial year alone is 1.7 million. In the past, what we've tried to do is make some assumptions in the figures about what further activity will do and actually build that into each of the setting types and work that through. I've taken the decision now, because the level of change in the figures is so dramatic, and we saw that for the Q4 of last financial year, that actually it doesn't add any value to try and build that into the core forecast figures, because then all that does for us all is get into an industry of trying to help others understand the specifics of what's moved within that. So what I wanted to do was build the forecast that's currently there is based on so we hold pupil level information to inform the forecast across everybody with a funded EHCP. We currently do that largely manually, so they're through spreadsheets based, and there's a significant amount of work goes in from both my team and the SEN team to make sure that we keep that as up to date as we can. The systems that we have in place don't allow us to automate that, and that is something that we're working very hard to resolve, but currently we don't have that. So it relies on a lot of hard work from individuals about manually maintaining that information. But that's the starting point of the forecast, is that pupil level information of agreed funding top-ups. We then build assumptions on the back of that about what might happen over the course of the year and what we know about individuals. For the first time, we have been able to, at this point in the year, build in phase transfer information into the forecast from September where that's known. So in previous financial years, because the SEND service wasn't able to share that with finance, at this point in the year, we would have a total finger in the air about what might happen in September. This year, I'm pleased to say that we have moved that on dramatically. The SEND team has worked tirelessly with my team to make sure that we have good phase transfer information to feed into the forecast. So we're not where we want to be, because we're set very high standards on where we want to be, but in terms of quality of forecast of where we are now, it's significantly moved on from where we were previously. That risk is over and above that, and I say this is something that I feel is important we look at separately, and we will keep updating that, how that risk translates into actual EHCP activity into the forecast as we move through the year.
Thank you, Dan. I'm very conscious of time. Is there so I'd like to come back to this, but do you want to roll on through the rest and then we'll come back if there are specific issues?
Yeah, so I think the key points, let's say I've set out more detail, and again, there's the 3 appendices. We've confirmed in there around growth fund, for example, what contingencies still in there, and that's obviously subject to review. Yeah, more information in here. Again, just trying to track through those key trends on there, and there's a bit more information in here around early years in particular. You know, just as a snapshot to show you that in April 2021, we had 4 early years funded top-ups in mainstream settings in Wokingham. It had gone up to 46 by April 2022. From a snapshot of assessment activity in early June, there were around 128 sitting in that statutory EHCA process, and around 70 were in relation to that youngest age group. So it's clearly a particular challenge that we have in terms of driving that activity. And again, just to pick up on your earlier point, Paul, I've set out again just in looking about the cost profile and cost analysis. So the original process for inflation on independent and non-maintained placements, we'd assumed we had, if you remember, around a £20,000 impact on 21-22. At the time of budget setting, we expected it to be higher for this year, given what was happening nationally and inflation pressures. So we'd assumed around sort of 40,000. What's now in forecast is around 51, so very small movement and lost in the in the roundings of the report, if you like. That was the approved position, so we expect providers to get requests in early, so that we should know by now. So that 51,000 is agreed and is being actioned and is in forecasts. We've had a very small number of further requests for review from different providers that are being worked through just now, where they've requested uplift for September. But again, it's not a material figure, and once commissioning it and others have been able to work through that process, we can bring further information on that back.
Can I pause you there for a second, Lynn? Darren, you've got your hand up.
Hello, Paul. Hello, Lynn. Just on page 49. On the growth fund forecast, Pickett should be 46, not 34.
This figure here.
Yeah, that should be 46. And I just wonder, Lynn, has the 5/12ths been paid out to the primary and secondary schools from the 2021-22?
Yes, it has been.
Oh, it's gone. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Catherine.
You should have that by now. Yeah.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, Darren.
Thanks for that input, Darren. Does that actually change the 104? Presumably it does. It doubles it, or it doesn't double it, but it presumably increases it.
It likely will do. Piers, Catherine, is there anything else you want to add, or is that something we just need to take away and relook at?
Yeah, we just need to change the figures. Yeah.
On the Pickett number.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Darren, thanks for flagging. We'll pick that up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions to Lynn, please? Lynn, was there anything further that, forgive my abrupt interruption, was there anything further on the report that you'd like to comment on?
I think the key part for me is how we continue to make these reports as useful as possible. You know, we have moved away from all those appendices tables, so any feedback, you know, either today or separately outside the meeting for forum, from forum members, I'd really appreciate that. We want to make this as you know, make sure we're focusing on the right discussion. So please do let me know if something's working and it doesn't feel like it's working so well for you.
Thank you. I'm conscious that again, I'm conscious of time, so forgive me for sort of bringing it short. Couple of issues I'd like to question. I think you should show the 1.7 million if you feel uncomfortable building it into the forecast. I think it needs to be on one of your tabulations to show risk 1.7 million and a new total below that risk. So I think you either build it into the individual forecast, which would be acceptable, but I understand there may be some complications in doing that. But if you don't, I think you should show it as a single line called risk. You've clearly identified that it is. I don't think any of us would debate how you've come up with that number. Looks, especially when you show the graph. But I think it should be somewhere on the front pages so that we're clear what the likely outturn may well be.
Yeah, absolutely fine, Paul. Yeah, I can do that to make that clearer. That's not a problem.
And the second one. Sarah, forgive me if I'm speaking on your behalf, but when we met earlier on during the year and we were looking at the budgets, I recall some concern about whether particularly Addington was able to present a budget for the coming year that genuinely met the need, the costed need of the school. When I see that we've got £429,000 in Addington's reserves, I'm hoping that between you and Sarah and others, that challenge of I need to spend a bit more money if I'm going to deliver the resource level I need to has been satisfactorily resolved.
Yes, it has. Yes.
Thank you,
yes, it has. And we've had meetings with Lynn and Dan Robinson, and we were very reassured with of how we're going to go forward. And so we're having planning meetings to look at the budget as we go forward. And as Lynn has said, some of our costs are hidden from other from health. And so we are looking at that going forward. But yes, we are now in a position that we feel that the local authority and we're working in partnership.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a very uplifting statement. Thank you very much for that. Great. Colleagues, are there any further questions to Lynn and or Catherine on revenue monitoring? One very final one from me. There's no hands go up. Can you ensure that the date goes on the top of your little tables? Because once we've got half a dozen dates, there's no. It's very difficult to see which month it refers to. Simple one. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Can we move on from item 42 to item 43, budget planning? I think we're switching to Catherine.
Yeah, it's me. Let me just share my screen. Right, so basically it's just a high-level timeline of what we're hoping to do for the setting the budgets for next financial year. We're still hoping to get, like we do every year in July, what our puff and stuff amounts are for the schools block funding, so the primary unit funding, the secondary unit funding, and hoping to meet with the task and finish group on the schools block side before the summer break. We're hoping to bring the principles of the funding behind all 4 blocks earlier to schools forum. So hopefully before Christmas we can come back to forum and say this is what we're hoping to do for the principles behind the funding for all of the 4 blocks. Obviously, whatever the DfE tell us as time goes on might impact that, but we're gonna. That's what our plan is. We have the task and finish group from last year for schools block. I'm hoping everyone wants to still join, still be involved in that. The current people that are on that list. If anyone else wants to join, let me know. If you don't want to, if you can't. Give us the time for that, then that's fine. Just let us know.
Actually, let's stop there, Darren. I saw your emoticon going up on there. Could colleagues? I think we've got everybody on there. Margaret's not on the call, and Ben's not on the call. But for Darren, Brian, Carol, or Chris isn't. I haven't seen Chris's name either today. Karina and Julia. Karina, thank you.
Yes, from me, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. Carol, are you? Yep, brilliant. So it looked great. I'm really and by way of background to those colleagues on the call who are fairly new, since we've had this task and finish group chaired by Darren and supported by this group, the setting of the budget for each of the years has been such a smooth process. So immense amount of thanks, and thank you all for taking on that extra task and supporting this particular team. Thank you. Catherine, do you want to move on to early years?
Yes, early years. We've got Ian on the call today, and Kerry. I don't think she's on. I didn't see her on the call.
She's not on the call.
And Karen as well. If that still wants to Karen, if anyone else wants to join in, if you know anyone that else wants to join. So I've got a lorry going past at the minute. Sorry, it's very loud.
Ian, would you be comfortable, please, in continuing to lead that group?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Thank you. Lovely.
Catherine, I'm aware of an early years national funding formula consultation going on. Are you aware?
No, that's not very good, is it? No.
It's just started. July the 4th it was issued. So
normally the DFE email us and let us know about all the consultations that are going on. So maybe that's winging its way. Okay, we can discuss that, can't we? If we meet next term, because obviously we won't know what our provisional allocation will be until December, but we can talk about the principles and things, can't we, in that consultation?
Yeah. Okay.
Next term. Brilliant.
Super.
Okay, and Madeline and Catherine, if you could follow up with Kerry and Karen, just to make sure that they're comfortable, please. And then we're looking at a high needs block task and finish group.
Yes, yeah. So to sort of work alongside, get it aligned with the Safety Valve programme that we're doing as well. Our initial thoughts was to keep it quite a small group, and maybe have a mix across the schools, like maybe a special school representative, a resource-based representative, the PRU, and someone from a mainstream school as well, just sort of bring all that expertise together. So if there's any volunteers now, or if you want to come to me afterwards, that's fine.
Sarah, could you or your business manager possibly be a standing member of that particular group?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Karina, wow, I don't know how you managed to fit all this in, but thank you very much. Karina has volunteered to stand. Is there anybody else who would like to put their hand up at this stage to join that little group? Have I got it? Deborah, thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Deborah. Did you know about this before you joined? That's great. Thank you. So we've got Deborah, Karina, Sarah. You didn't. And you would like somebody from the PRU as well. Perhaps we can write to, I think it's Ian at the PRU, isn't it? We need to write to.
Ian just said Raj would help, so that's brilliant.
Brilliant. Do you, is that sufficient, or do you?
I think, yeah, we can start with that, see how we go. Yeah, and then what we could do is if anyone wants to join our high needs block training sessions, like join the first ones of those if you feel you need to, so then we can progress the task and finish group quicker, so everyone's up to speed.
Okay.
And I've just got a high level timeline here just to show basically how it all fits in across the year, all the different bits. So just to give us some idea on how that fits in the schools forum meetings as well.
Wonderful. The one thing that I didn't see on there that I would like to question, the 0.5% disapplication. So given we were bushwhacked last year, before we get to the point where we end up having a little bit of a contretemps, could we agree where we are going before that particular point? So we need to undertake a consultation. We need to have some language that goes out around that consultation, and it needs to be fair. But equally, I think we need to understand in advance where the local authority is likely to position itself.
Paul, I'm more than happy that we'll do things clearly in advance, and we'll want to be fully transparent. I'm not sure that I would agree that Schools Forum were bushwhacked. I think we went through a number of iterations with School Forum around seeking further clarity, which led to the vote. But again, going forward, like I say, we will be really transparent around the intentions of the local authority as we move to that delegation discussion when it arrives.
Okay, thank you. So it's the language that goes into the consultation, and it's understanding the approach that the local authority would like to take depending upon the outcomes. Thank you. Are there any questions for Catherine, Sal, or Lynn for that matter on item 43, budget planning? If not, then thank you to those that have volunteered to stay with the task and finish groups. Catherine, thank you very much for the plan. Looks wonderful laid out like that. If we can move then from item 43 onto item 44. Sal, I'm handing back to you for high needs block update. I know you've got Dan as well on the call. Hi, welcome, Dan.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, right, just setting that up and sharing the slide. I am going to call in Dan and Jenny and other colleagues as appropriate as we go through the update. And again, this is hopefully some further information for Schools Forum that you're asked to note. It's provided in the context that Lynn has already outlined in respect to the position of the high needs block within the DSG. So again, I don't intend to rehearse that, given that we've just had some of that information and conversation around it. But what I do want to focus on is what's the activity that's going on at the moment. Colleagues will be aware that following our SEND written statements of action revisit, there was one element of that action that was deemed not to be sufficiently progressed, which was around our transitions arrangements into adulthood. And so we have been working on an accelerated performance plan in respect of our arrangements for transitions there. We've developed an action plan of 6 key areas that colleagues will have seen in the report. We've been working with our DFE SEND advisor and other colleagues as we've been progressing our actions against each of those areas. And we have a review meeting with both the DFE and NHS England colleagues just next week in terms of where we are in respect of our accelerated action plan. We believe now, from a partnership perspective, that we are sufficiently progressed, and we're hopeful that the outcome will be that we will no longer require an APP going forward. So that's where we are in respect of the transitions developments. I'm going to look to other colleagues now to just give a slight update in terms of where we are with the SIPIT review, in terms of, again, as colleagues have seen in the paperwork, we're seeking to extend whilst we finalise our procurement. But Dan, did you want to come in on this one, please?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. So with regards to the ongoing discussions, the tender and the bid is in, so we're going through that process of interviews and presentations. It's been elongated due to the questions asked from the panel making the decision, and some queries that have come up that that they need to go back and produce more evidence on. Because of that evidence request from West Berkshire, Reading and ourselves, it just feels that that extension is needed so that we can make the right decision and have the right contract in place, and it doesn't affect services that they're currently providing. So just a brief overview on that. Obviously can't discuss too much because it's ongoing.
Is it likely to extend the, for want of a better word, the implementation date, the effective start of your programme?
Yeah, so it will run from the start. The length of time of the programme will still run, but it will obviously start from 7 months on, as opposed to what we were first thinking, if that makes sense. Yeah,
it does, and presumably that, sadly, that would have
has an effect on. Yeah,
it has a cost impact as well.
Yeah, which we're trying to put together so we can work with Lynn just so she can see that. But at the moment, that is as we go through that process, it's still trying to understand what that will look like.
Thank you.
Okay, and then moving into the Foundry review again, Dan and Lynn have been leading this work, working with Ian and colleagues at Foundry. So again, Dan or Lynn, do you want to give a little bit of update here?
Lynn, if you're okay, if I give an update on the review sort of as a whole, and you come in on the budget, and then Ian may want to comment. The conversations around those SLAs, I think, will future proof and help with that strategic process. I think it will really help with how we plan with the budget and where that money, how useful that money being spent is for Ian. I think that with that team there, our conversations going backward and forward in terms of those SLAs is getting to a point where it's really clear. There have been delays. That is solely due to the capacity issues within commissioning, which they've apologised for. There have been, you know, some issues on the way which we think we've rectified now, but Ian can comment, and I think we're in a reasonably good position in terms of what those SLAs are going to look like. I think that will have an ability in terms of the budget and the pre-planning for schools form to be really clear, and where we can really see the outcomes linked to that moving forward. So that's just a really, you know, very overview of what's happened so far and where we are. I don't know if Lynn wants to comment, or Ian specifically, on the budget.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, Dan, that, you know, we set the budget and the funding for Foundry this year, you know, jointly, you know, looking at our current understanding, the current profile with staff and structure believed needed, etc. But it was based on a set of assumptions, and we committed to that ongoing work with Foundry to understand, for example, the impact of no longer de-delegating for the outreach service and moving to a direct charge system. About, you know, we had assumptions about what that might mean in practice, but we really need to monitor really closely through this year what that looks like. So let's say Catherine and I are meeting with Rajani and Friday this week as the sort of first sort of end of quarter one of the financial year to look at how things are progressing, what are the themes that are coming out, what are the challenges, are there any challenges that maybe we didn't identify at the time of budget setting. One, so that if there's any real, you know, any potential issues emerging for this financial year, we can work together to look to how we resolve that, but equally as importantly, so that we're reflecting on that early in terms of budget setting for next year and longer term financial planning, that we are, you know, we're working together to see how we can get that in the best place possible.
Thanks, Lynn. Ian, you're welcome. Hi again. Sorry. Are you?
That's okay. Thanks. You know, we have had our meeting for our first SLA meeting this week, and we've tried to outline our concerns with any parts that are inside of there. And Carey's been working with us on that, so hopefully we can iron out a bit further, hopefully before the end of this term, so that, you know, coming forward for September we can actually have an SLA in place, and that's what we're looking forward to do. So we hope to be at the next forum that we will actually have an SLA.
You're comfortable with the relationship and the working relationship that's trying to get you to a point where you have something that you can both sides, forgive me, it's not a competition, but both parts of the organisation can look at and make sure they can manage and understand the service quality against that.
Well, I think we're at the very infancy of it, if I'm honest with you, but okay. We've got the SLA, which actually looks at what is it that the LA would like us to do, and about what our core functions are going to be, and about how we're going to be funded appropriately for that. So that's a great starting point, and we haven't had for many years. So the fact that we've now got that gives us a basis to then have those discussions on, and it, you know, looking at us meeting the needs of the local authority and being funded appropriately for that. So, you know, it's great that we've made that start, and, you know, hopefully over the next kind of 2.5 weeks before we break up, we can continue to work together to make sure we can tie it up.
Okay. And have we got the big elephant in the room that says, does Foundry become a traded service or not? And do we also have the other slightly smaller elephant in the room, which is, and what therefore do schools across the rest of the borough need to be looking at for their budget planning for 23-24 in terms of the relationship and the interface with Foundry?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Is that the outreach service in particular?
Yeah, I was just going
to. Yeah, just generally, I mean, there's a relationship between Foundry and all of the other schools around Wokingham, and that relationship has to be managed and guided in a particular way, and has an impact upon the budgets of many schools, and also presumably has an impact upon Ian and how he runs his programme. as well as whether Foundry is, for want of a better word, a lump sum of money that Wokingham Borough Council pays for, or there are other inputs and outputs that go with it, outreach service, costed for the services, etc.
Yeah, I just think so. With regards to Foundry, and I'm popping down to have a meeting with Ian on Friday. Obviously, the outreach service is now traded in effect. With regards to the SLAs, they'll define, and they're based on the need now of the area that's being put through. So I'm not quite sure what you mean in terms of whether the whole of Foundry is a traded service, though, Brian. I'm just a bit confused on that comment. I suppose I don't understand.
No, it wasn't the whole of it.
Okay.
The fact that the challenges we've had in the past are for Jay previously and now for Ian, that there's almost no security about the level of funding, and therefore building the resource capability within Foundry to support what is an unknown level of requirement which needs funding is always a challenge. And when you move to effectively however you want to phrase it, charging for some of those services, that's a very difficult place to be, and a less secure place when you're trying to put a budget together.
Yeah, so I think that when we get to the end of the first year of doing this, and with the 3 SLAs in place for the other delivery areas, we'll have a clear picture. I think that also, though, links to the work within the IIP in general in terms of mapping the whole need of the area. So I think it's that uniform decision where the partnership as a whole works much closer together, and that silo pressure is there. I do have an absolute empathy for probably what Ian's facing, where I imagine his staff are still asking, well, if it's not trading, we don't meet it, what happens? That's the climate we're in, because we've never done it before. And as you've said, as Ian's raised before, we've gone out and we've delivered against the unknown, and it is now a situation. So I suppose we're going through, and I understand there's people involved, so I get that we're going through a process of pain so that we can be sustainable for the next 5-10 years and meet the needs of the area. But this is going to be a really difficult year for Ian to manage that staff anxiety, and that's part of the reason, I suppose, for coming down on Friday to see what we can do around that, because it is difficult. I think what we can say is the need's not going to go away. So it's more about defining what we deliver and what we do, as opposed to any risk, if that makes sense. It's probably, we have great needs everywhere, Brian, that we need to increase what we provide for. So although I have a confidence that Ian's probably doesn't, because he's in the spotlight at the moment on that, I'm comfortable, if anything, it'll be an increase in what we need to deliver as opposed to a decrease, if that makes sense.
Forgive me, I understand the words. Now I can see why Ian prefaced the conversation by saying we're at the start of a journey. It does sound like there is still quite a journey to be undertaken before, as the leadership team of the PRU, they can have that confidence, they can take the resource forward, knowing that there's some sort of underlying support guarantee to ensure that the resource availability.
It's once, I think it's once the agreements are then in place, that's the starting point, because at the moment we're trying to get to that starting point which hasn't been there before. So the agreement for funding was there, which is wonderful, but then it's what do you want to do with that money is the agreement, because then that you've got the agreement from the money, it's about the agreement what you want us to do with that money, which then allows us to recruit to then fulfill that need. But the process is, the way that we've gone through it, we are at the starting point. It's great that we've got the support from the local authority with the funding, and we've gone through all of that, and that's wonderful. And we'll have our review to show how we're tight with our money to make sure we're meeting what we need to. And it's now looking at, right, what is it you want us to deliver, how you want us to deliver that, to make sure that we can meet the need of the local authority, and as well as our core function of looking after the medical vulnerable and permanently excluded, because as the PRU, that is our core function.
I think it's important, Brian, to just make the comment, the core functions are the areas that are not going to be a concern on that. But the reason we've done what we've done with the outreach is because obviously at Schools Forum over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a vote on the reduction of that funding. So, that it's about making sure that, we can really sort of work that through so that it is sufficient, and that's why it's there. So I suppose it's because of what's happened over the last 2 years in terms of why we are doing what we're doing now.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Thank you, Ian. Sal, if we come back to you, do you want to take? Does Jenny want to share a little bit more on?
Very again, fairly quickly, because I'm conscious of time and the agenda. As part of the whole high needs block agenda, we're also, as colleagues will be aware, really looking at local provision planning. What is it that's going to assist us? What do we need within the borough in order to support the challenges that we're facing, both in terms of being able to educate our children with SEND locally, but clearly the high needs block pressures. So there's some information there within the report around the kind of areas that we're exploring at the moment, the sorts of things that we're looking into. And then all of this ties into our safety valve programme. Again, we've been in conversations with the ESFA and the Department for Education around Wokingham's inclusion within the safety valve intervention programme. Colleagues may be aware, but this is a programme that's offered to local areas that have got challenges with their high needs block. And it's where we will work with the National Commissioner around SEND to look through our high needs block arrangements and our deficit management plan. If we're successful in being included in the safety valve programme, that can support some injection of resource and funding into the local authority to support our aims, which then support deficit reduction. So, for example, safety valve may come with additional capital funding, some significant capital funding that we can put into, as I said, looking at our local provision and how we might develop that. It can also bring other funding to support us in terms of managing our high needs block. Well, actually, it's the whole DSG, but a primary focus on the high needs block deficit. We're having conversations with them. Our next conversation is early September. I'm hopeful that we will know whether we've been accepted into the intervention programme later in September. It'll clearly link to the high needs task and finish group that Catherine's just talked to, and thank you colleagues for putting yourselves forward for that, because I think that's going to be a place where we collectively are driving the work around our safety valve programme. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of the SEND IIP update.
Lovely, thank you, Sal. Can I open it to colleagues if they have questions for Sal or Dan or Jenny or any of the team? Sal, I'm not seeing any hands go up, so if I can thank you, Dan, Jenny, etc. Thank you for that report. If I can move from item 44 onto item 45, which, looking at again my little crib sheet, Lynn, I think this is you. I'm very conscious of time. Could we sort of whizzle through this one as quickly as possible, or just even note it, for example?
Yeah, I will do my very best, Paul. So so this report is just for noting. It's on maintained school balances. It's not something we have routinely been reporting in this level of detail over recent years through Schools Forum, but it is good practice to do that. And that's in part so that we have a collective understanding, particularly at this time of year, getting into budget setting, about some of the more specifics that's happening within our local maintained schools. It obviously only sets part of the picture. We don't have academy balances to report, but from the responsibility of the local authority and looking of that, it gives us a bit of overview of the position of maintained schools balances. There's detail in the report, so for time purposes, I'm not going to rattle through all of it, but I suppose the key themes are the overall maintained balances did increase relatively significantly for the second year in a row. But there's a real range of situations that sit underneath that in terms of the scope of reserves that individual schools have. You will see in the appendix there's the school by school breakdown, what that movement looks like and what that sort of represents in terms of reserve balances as a percentage of income. There's some RAG rating arrows in there, so just broadly to let you know that sort of an up arrow is an increase in reserves, down arrows obviously decrease, but red or green sort of gives you an indication of where that is. So there are some, for example, schools where their reserves have fallen over the course of the last the last financial year, but they still sit above the sort of average levels that we would expect. So that might be a down arrow that's green, for example. Although in contract, there are some schools where there are reserves have increased over the year, but they're below where we would reasonably expect. So that could be an up arrow that's red. The report is just for information, but I just wanted to bring to Forum's attention just around the scheme for financing schools. That we haven't brought an update on that document through Schools Forum for a little time, and that's something that we'll be doing. It's on the forward plan for October to update that scheme in line with national guidance. In terms of the guidance that comes for local authorities, there's obviously that sets out in there about what needs to happen about where schools are in deficit and what that looks like. But the guidance does allow local authorities to have something in their scheme for financing schools around any mechanism for clawing back excess surplus balances. We don't currently have that in our scheme for financing schools. If that was something we wanted to consider, then we would need to look at that together, consult on schools and consider that for a future audition. So I suppose this is just, a question about some further information. We'll bring back some further information on schools in deficit at a later forum, but really to get a sense of whether Forum are interested in us bringing back some more work on surplus balances and whether that's something that they want us to spend any time reviewing on or not. I've obviously reflected in the report the fact that while the guidance states that we can have a mechanism for clawing back, there's also an expectation about allowing schools to move towards greater autonomy. So that's clear in the guidance that there's a balance in there to be sought.
Thank you, Lynn. Again, open to colleagues for questions to Lynn. Not got any hands going up at the moment, but you can guess that I've got a couple. I think it would be really useful. I'm really harping back to my falling roles and the challenges that may bring. I think if we were able to see the pan and the current or the role at the moment and understand whether some of these challenges are driven by a lower pupil number, but yet a fairly static cost level, I think that would be very helpful. And certainly if we could see that brought forward. I'm also assuming that with the no matter how you, and I think you approached it in a very smart way. You suggested to everybody, this is what you should budget for increase in energy costs. We hear very clearly that they are going to increase, possibly double. So a big chunk of your numbers in here are going to disappear, not through any fault of the school, but just because of the way that the actual costs come in.
Absolutely, and we'll be looking at this. So this is obviously a position statement as where we were at the 31st of March 2022. There are a number of schools have obviously set their budgets for this year on a set of assumptions, and as those change, we will be reviewing that and sort of budget monitoring updates against this as well, so that if there's any key themes or anything significantly different in trends, then we can certainly bring that back over the course of the year.
And then I think more for you. If I were in your position, I would also be looking at what was the budgeted energy cost for each of these schools for this coming year, and then just do a very quick mental calculation to see where you're likely to be if you know those costs are potentially going to double through the year. I think you'll find I'll chew up a fair old chunk of your 1.2 million surplus that you have at the moment.
Yeah, I mean surpluses or deficits aside, absolutely, that's part of the ongoing work with Ian and his team of looking at what was the position, how did we understand that at an individual school level, and how is that looking out. Absolutely, that's part of ongoing good financial management behind the scenes. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions for Lynn / Catherine? If not, thank you for that, Lynn. If we can move on to item 46, school forum membership. I'm not going to spend very much time on this. Luciana produced a report which is in your document pack. Every year we're required to look at the membership relative to the phase and the type of schools that make up Wokingham Borough Council's school group. You'll see in that report that there has been effectively only one change in the last year. That doesn't impact the number of young people in each phase and type, and therefore we are recommending that for the coming year the membership remains in terms of its numerical structure exactly as it is now. Are there any questions on that? I can't see any. Madeline, I think we know, do we have to vote on this? Madeline, could you guide me as to whether this is a voting issue or whether it is just a noting issue?
Could you vote, please?
We could vote, please. Okay, please. So therefore, could I ask all school forum members with a vote, could I ask you please to vote for or against this membership review and its recommendation that the membership structure, phase and type remains as is. Preferably if you can use the wonderful mechanics of hands going up, I'd be very grateful. Okay, looking down. Madeline, can you see that on your screen?
Yes, thank you.
So I think we have absolute unanimity. Wonderful. So if you've got a track of that, Madeline, then thank you all for voting. Everybody voted for. Can I ask if anybody votes against the proposal as presented? So if you could all drop your hands for the moment. I'm going to drop mine as well. And I can see no hands voting against the proposal. Oh, Carol, sorry. Hi, Carol. Oh, no. Up and down. Yes, Carol, your hand is still up. Do you want to? No, it's gone down again. Fine. So that's nobody again. Everybody, well, all the 15 people for and nobody against. Madeline, are you happy with that detail?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, great. If we can move very briefly onto the forward plan and then onto any other business. Does anybody have any comments on the forward plan as presented in the documents that we've had today? Forward plan at the moment for October has the regular revenue monitoring, high needs block update, DSG budget update, scheme for financing schools. We've added the EWS from today. Thank you, Sal, coming up there for that. And Madeline may well pick out a couple of other items that we will bring in there and we will distribute. Is there anybody who's got anything for the forward plan for October? I can't see any hands. Then if I move on to any other business and go round the group as they appear on my screen. Ali, anything from you?
No, thank you.
Brian?
No, thank you.
Callum, I'm thank you if I can skip you for a second. Carol?
No, thank you.
Karina?
No, thank you.
Dan? Dan's possibly dropped off, it's on hold. Deborah?
No, thank you, Paul.
Darren?
No, thank you, Chair.
Hi, Hayley. Hi, we haven't heard from you, but is there anything that you need to table or would like to table?
No, thank you.
Ian? Oh, Ian?
No, thank you, Paul.
And Ian Thomas?
No, thank you.
Jenny?
No, thank you.
Catherine?
No, thanks.
Liz?
No, thanks.
Lynn?
No, thank you.
Madeline, anything that we've not done right or we should have done that we haven't done?
I don't believe so, no.
Luck, thank you. Julia?
No, thank you.
Piers? Welcome, Piers. I'm sorry we haven't. No, I think Piers may be.
No, sorry, I'm here. No.
Yeah, no, thank you. I saw you there. Thank you. Sal?
No, nothing from me. Other
Sarah?
say, good to be back.
Thank you. Sarah?
No, thank you.
Shirley?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Morag, if I'm coming back to you, your first session, if you wanted to say a few words, please please do.
Well, that was very kind. It was just to say I found it very useful. I don't have any other things that I want to raise, and I've obviously got a lot more reading to do, but I found it very handy. So thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much, Morag. Then colleagues, thank you very much for a couple of minutes to 12, so well in time. Catherine and Lynn, particularly for all of your work. Sal, for the team, thank you very much for all the work you put into this. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you, a few of you, in the first week of September, but then everybody else at the meeting in October. Oh, actually, sorry, Madeline, if I could add one. Ginny, who's not on the meeting today, this would have been her last meeting, and I tried going back through my minutes. I think she's been on School Forum something like 9 years. And has been a stalwart and in terms of supporting School Forum, always with a very clear view, always very elegantly put to everybody. So if we could minute perhaps our thanks to Ginny for her contribution to School Forum for the last 9 years.
Yes, no problem.
Thanks, everybody. Wish everybody a
Thank
good
you
summer
all.
and speak to you all in October. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.